Welcome to My Morning Cup, a podcast produced by Costa Media Advisors and brought to you by the generous support of the Tennessee Valley Authority. To learn more about TVA's impact on our community, follow TVA on Instagram at TVA and on Twitter X at TVA News. My Morning Cup, where we have interesting conversations with genuine people. I'm Mike Costa, your host. My guest this week is Susan Vandergriff. After a career in the corporate banking world, Susan left for something different, the nonprofit world. Along the way, she discovered birds. Actually, the calming effect of songbirds. Susan, welcome to My Morning Cup. Before this conversation takes flight, let me ask, what's in your morning cup?
Well, actually, my morning cup is straight black coffee. That's all I drink. But I also only drink bird-friendly coffee.
Oh, you got to explain that.
I thought you might need some explanation for that.
Bird-friendly coffee.
Certified bird-friendly coffee. So most coffee.
There's certified bird-friendly coffee?
It's actually certified by the Smithsonian. So most coffee is grown out in the sun on coffee plantations that have been clear cut of trees. But bird-friendly coffee is actually shade grown under a native canopy of trees. So it actually, and it's so important for migratory songbirds, like our beautiful, like right now in Chattanooga, rose-breasted grosbeaks and indigo buntings are here, which are beautiful migratory birds that come from Central and South America, where a lot of coffee plantations are. And if we start cutting all the trees to grow coffee, those beautiful migratory songbirds don't have a place to winter. So we actually at Happy Birdwatcher, we promote bird-friendly coffee, and because there's nothing better than drinking coffee and watching your birds, but making sure that it's coffee that doesn't harm your songbirds.
So how did you find out about bird-friendly coffee? I mean, did you go online and look for it?
Yeah. So when you really get into birds and you become kind of a bird nerd, and you're, all sorts of things start popping up in your social media and your news feed. And I can't remember how I initially stumbled across it, but once I did, and again, it was so fascinating and interesting to me, I immediately gave it a try because I love coffee and discovered it, and I've been hooked ever since.
Is there a taste difference?
I think just like most coffee, there's different
slight,
there's different blends. But I mean, it is organic. This particular coffee that we sell, it's Migration Celebration from Dean's Beans, and it's actually picked on a farm where it's only women workers. So it's organic. It's, promotes women. It's good for birds. It checks all the boxes
I was going to say
for things that are really important to me.
Yeah. So. And that's good. All right. So caffeine, non-caffeine.
Oh, caffeine.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But black.
Black.
Well, I admire that.
Multiple cups. I do.
Yeah, I admire that. And I want to get into talking about bird watching and songbirds, but I want to talk first about your career. But I do have one comment on the migratory. Mm-hmm. I don't think a lot of people in Chattanooga realize what a migratory highway we have here. I do some work with reflection riding, mm-hmm. and it's been described as a migratory superhighway. So we're seeing birds fly from South America.
Oh, absolutely. Well, like I said, right now, this time of year in May, for about 3 to 4 weeks, we have these beautiful, they're one of my favorite birds. It's called a rose-breasted grosbeak. And they have black and white tails and this red triangle on their chest. The males have. They are gorgeous. And yeah, they come all the way from Central America. They're on their way north to breeding grounds, and they stop over here around Mother's Day for 3 to 4 weeks every year. And a lot of people don't realize that. I mean, it's just like hummingbirds, for example. Hummingbirds are now in our area. And did you know that a hummingbird will fly across the Gulf of Mexico in one night? In a single flight? They fly all the way across the Gulf of Mexico.
How fast are they flying? I mean,
I'd have to
they gotta
look
be
it
going
up. But
pretty.
Yeah.
It kind of goes to the old Henny Youngman joke. I just flew in last night, and boy, my arms are tired.
Exactly. A hummingbird can say that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk a little bit about yourself first. You grew up around here. You grew up in Dunlap.
I did. Yeah, born and raised over in the Sequatchie Valley.
So growing up in Dunlap, it's a little more rural and isolated than Chattanooga. Was outdoors and nature something that always interested you, or were you like a lot of teenagers who grew up like that, just want to get out of there?
I didn't really just want to get out, but I definitely, so my parents, we raised beef cattle. So I grew up kind of like, it wasn't their full-time job, but it was, we always had cattle and had a farm. And actually my house that I still live in today is on a little piece of property, kind of what's left of what was a much bigger tract of farmland that belonged to my grandparents and even great-grandparents. And of course, it gets divided up over time. But
so you've got some generational connection to Dunlap.
Oh, absolutely. Both sides of my family for multiple generations.
Wow, that's neat.
Yeah.
So grew up raising cattle I think you told me your dad worked for TVA.
Yeah, my dad worked for TVA. My mom had just various office jobs. My maternal grandparents were really instrumental in my life and really played an important part and, took me to church every Sunday and were just always there for me. And my grandfather, before I was born, he was actually mayor of Dunlap for a term, and he was a county commissioner. So, I grew up kind of like tagging along to county commission meetings and really active in our church. And so I was very kind of like involved or saw my family members being involved in sort of the betterment of the community.
So growing up, what is it you wanted to be when you were a kid, a teenager? You're growing up, in really idyllic situation.
Yeah, you take it for granted, though, because I don't think you realize how idyllic it was. And like literally when I was growing up and, in the late 70s and 80s as a child in Dunlap, we seriously had one red light. There was a song about Dunlap, Tennessee with like one red light in the middle of town. And that's what it was. And it was very, everyone knew everyone. There wasn't diversity, though. Everyone was the same. And which was kind of when you start broadening your horizons as an adult, you look back and like, wow, that was quite a sheltered, didn't get exposed to a lot of things that maybe I wish I would have. But it was a very beautiful area to grow up. But going back to nature, it was just I didn't really see myself as like, I wasn't aware of birds. I wasn't really into, it was just kind of around you. And I think you take it for granted without really noticing like the beauty that's around you.
Yeah, until you're removed from it.
Yes. Yeah.
So as a kid, though, you had to have some kind of like, I want to do this, I want to do that, or did you?
I think I wanted to be a teacher.
Yeah.
I had a lot of great aunts that were teachers. Entrepreneurship never crossed my mind. And again, I had parents that had very traditional jobs, and I don't think I really knew all of my career options or kind of what my choices might be. And then I went to college, and for a while I majored in pre-pharmacy, and then I switched and I went to nursing, and then I kind of went back to secondary education, and I had multiple majors before I finally landed on anthropology. And that was kind of a long story how I got to there. But going to UTC, I started right out of high school, dropped out of college, had a big break, and then went back to school as an adult when I had a young son at home, and didn't finish UTC until I was 30 when I got my bachelor's degree.
Well, that's a challenge to go back when you've got other responsibilities, and your focus changes tremendously, doesn't it?
It does, but I think I loved being an adult student because I appreciated that education so much more. But yeah, I went back. I was like 25 when I went back, and I had a 1-year-old and a husband, and I was working part-time in banking and going to night classes and raising my son. And I do think I got so much more out of it the second time.
Appreciated it more.
Oh, yes.
Saw the value of
Very much so.
You brought up something a little earlier that I wanted to touch on. You weren't exposed to entrepreneurship growing up. I'm a bit older than you, but kind of I grew up in that 70s, 80s time period. And I think those of us who grew up in that time period, entrepreneurship wasn't really, what's the best way to put it? Not forced on us, but talked about a lot, or examples were given a lot. It was more about go find a good company and a good job.
Yes. One that you're going to, go to work for and you're going to stay at and you're going to retire from.
Yeah.
And that was kind of, you had to pick one thing and stay with it. So it's funny. I think kind of very briefly, I remember being in middle school, and a friend of mine, we had went to the Dollar General or the local 5 and dime, and we made a bunch of little hair barrettes with ribbons on them, and we took them to school and we sold them, and we were making some good money in 5th grade. And I remember that the teachers caught wind of it, and we got called to the principal's office, and we were told you have to stop. You can't do this at school.
Yeah.
And that was my one and only kind of shot. And I remember how much I enjoyed that and how much fun we had going and selecting the ribbons and making them and selling them and collecting the money. And I've looked back on that and thought wow, if that had been not squashed, you can't do that, that's against the rules, but encouraged. And I think that would be in today's world, where we talk about entrepreneurship and we celebrate, ideas that children have and value them and what they want to do. I do think that I probably would have landed on entrepreneurship a lot sooner in life if it hadn't,
I think in the 70s and 80s, for those of us who grew up in that time period, conformity was more important. You had to conform to a certain thing. Again, find the right company, and you move where they told you to move, because that's where the job was. And for God's sake, don't take any risk.
Right. Exactly. So I think one reason I had to change majors so many times, and then I finally just, pick something so I could gradrate, because I just want the degree, whatever,
and frankly,
takes
that's what it becomes when you get out of college. Once you get that degree, that's just the piece of admission to your first job.
Right. Because I none of those things that those traditional things like teaching and nursing or pharmacy or whatever, those didn't appeal to me. Mm-hmm. And then I felt when I didn't have something to land on that I felt like my other peers, were all picking something and sticking with it. And then that was their future.
So when you got your degree from UTC, what did you do next?
So I was actually already in banking, and I was working part-time because I had a young child at home, and I got that degree, and I had decided at that point to homeschool. And the bank, I had an awesome schedule. I loved my job. I had the pay was good, and I had benefits as a part-time person. So
that's big.
Not much changed for me after I got the degree. I kept working part-time and kept homeschooling my son. And as I continued to do that, and as he got a little older and we started winding into high school and he was going to be graduating soon, I knew I wanted a career change. Yeah. I had been in banking all total 17 years. And I was kind of okay, I've done that part of my life, and it's time to do something different. So I really felt a call to go into nonprofit work, and decided to go back and get my master's degrees, because I needed education or something, because I had applied for a few nonprofit jobs, but just someone with all these years of banking wasn't really appealing.
Wasn't grabbing their attention.
It wasn't grabbing their attention.
And all this time, you're in Dunlap.
I'm in Dunlap.
And when you went back to get your master's degree, you went to Liberty University. Was that remotely?
Yeah, that was online. So again, and chose that because I needed something where I could work and still homeschool my kids and get my degree.
What'd you get your master's in?
Yeah, my master's is actually in human services counseling.
Was that to address the nonprofit aspect of it?
Yeah. It was counseling really interested me, and I really thought that I would, after I got the degree, I would go into nonprofit work and do case management. That was the overall goal.
I do want to step back a little bit to some of your first jobs. That's something I saw that just kind of jumped out at me. One of your first jobs was sewing boxer shorts.
It was. So between high school and college, I needed a part-time job, and over in Pikeville, over in the valley, not far from home, Robinson's Manufacturing needed a second shift part-time, sewing machine operators. And I went, and they give you a little test, dexterity to make sure you can sew it on a machine. And I was put to work sewing 2 seats together of boxer shorts. And I did not last the whole summer. I don't remember how long I lasted, just a few weeks. I was not a good seamstress, and I got in trouble, and they would rip the seams out and make me do it over. And I had so many rejects.
That's hard work,
It was hard work, and I was miserable. And it was only like a 4-hour shift, but it's sitting in one place for 4 hours, and you're just grabbing, piece of material in your right hand and a piece in your left and running it through a machine. And for me, I hated it. I was awful at it. So I had to give that up quickly.
Was that a motivator to go on and get your degree?
Oh, absolutely. It was an eye opener, very much so. Couldn't
see yourself doing that the rest of your life.
Oh, absolutely not. And working in an environment like, you had to ask permission to leave your station, to go to the bathroom, and when you ate. I mean, it was a very, it was not an environment that I could ever see myself in. And I appreciate those. I had a grandmother that worked in the zipper factory in Dunlap I think she retired twice from there. She loved it so much, and she went back. So I have respect, tremendous respect for factory workers, but I just knew that it was not a good fit.
Yeah, but it was a motivator for you to go on and pursue the other things.
Sure.
And to jump back ahead with where we were, so you get your degree in counseling from Liberty, and you decide to get out of the corporate world. And who's the nonprofit that you...
Yeah, so I was looking for a job, and I saw an advertisement for a part-time office manager for A Step Ahead Chattanooga. And the mission of A Step Ahead, which was to provide free birth control for women so they could plan their pregnancies and plan their futures. That mission of that organization I just loved it. And I thought, wow, that's really awesome. And it's a young nonprofit. It had only been around about a year. And I did not want to really be an office manager, but I loved the mission so much that I applied for the job, and that's where I started. And I was there for nearly 7 years. And when I left, I was the executive director.
What surprised you about going from the corporate world to the nonprofit world that you didn't expect?
I don't know if I really had any surprises. I had worked for SunTrust Bank, here Chattanooga based. And then of course I went to a nonprofit that was also Chattanooga based. And, Chattanooga really is a small town, everybody kind of knows everybody. And so many of my customers would overlap with now our donors. And there was various different circles. I really didn't have any surprises, but I did really love the nonprofit world in Chattanooga. I felt especially, and maybe it's just I had really good mentors and a great organization behind me, but it was very empowering. I didn't feel, I never felt less than, like being a woman or being in charge, or I really always felt respected. And I say that because since I've left nonprofit and I've went into, back into running my own business, especially in Dunlap, which is a smaller town, I have this issue that it's popped up several times where, my husband and I will be together, like we were looking at office space, and because we moved the business out of my home into a warehouse space over in Dunlap, and we're looking at space together because he's just a great supporter of my business, and everyone directly goes to him, and, they shake his hand and they want to talk to him. And, and then I was like looking at the kitchen facilities one time at this warehouse space, and the person showing us, made like a remark about like, oh, the women have to look at the kitchen. And my husband, who is amazing, and he has to do this more than once. And his is like, oh no, she's the boss. It's her business. You need to direct your questions to her. And I had it just last week. I had a vendor who was coming to look at something at the business, and I had walked out and was having a conversation, and my husband walks out and they stop what they're doing and they shake his hand and address him with the questions. And it's been really hard for me because I had such a great, empowering experience as a nonprofit leader in Chattanooga as a woman. And now to be a woman business owner in a small town, I have to ask myself, what year are we in? Because it's really been difficult for me to experience that.
So do you notice that more as a difference between Dunlap and Chattanooga, or just in general that a lot of the attitude is still the same?
Yeah, I think it's both. maybe it's more accepting for a woman to run a nonprofit than it is for a woman to run a birdseed business that, is we need warehouse space and we have fulfillment. And it's a very, and I've even seen that in the bird feeding industry, at the bird feeding industry conferences and so forth, or you've got companies that have been around for, 60, 70 years and they're all run by men.
Yeah, and they got warehouse space and they got rack and they're dealing with truckers and logistics and all those kind of things.
Exactly.
So when something like that happens, how do you address it without it in a balanced way? Or do you just say, "Oh, hey, Bob, over here"?
It's really difficult because I'm a very direct and matter of fact I'm a Southern girl and I like to be polite, but I'm very direct and I do usually call it out.
What are some of the reactions from people who make that misstep?
It's like they don't understand it at first. They, my husband before has said, "Oh, she's the boss," and they're like, "Oh, ha ha ha."
Yeah.
Like everybody says that.
My wife's the boss too.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And he has to no, she's the boss, and and then I have to take over. So, again, that's been probably one of the most surprising things that's happened to me. Transitioning from nonprofit into the business.
And that's an interesting point you made. There's levels of acceptance in people's minds of, well, it makes sense for a young woman to be in charge of a nonprofit, but not of a business.
Right.
And a nonprofit's nothing more than a business. It's a business function or it's a type of business.
Yes.
Yes.
We need to compensate our nonprofit leaders like we do businesses, which is a challenge in and of itself.
Another day.
That is to help change that perception.
So you're in the nonprofit world and there's stresses because you're running an organization and you're sitting on your porch in Dunlap. Tell me about 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Yeah. So in 2019, actually I was in leadership and nonprofit at the time, but personally I was going through a really difficult season. My husband and I, between the two of us, second marriage for both of us, between the two of us, we have 6 children.
Oh, wow.
And now 1 grandchild that we're...
Kind of Brady Bunch.
Yeah. And we have a grandchild that we're raising at home. So I have a baby in the house. So, but in 2019, my oldest son was struggling with drug addiction. And we had just discovered that. And it was really the most difficult thing I've ever had to deal with in my life. And I had heard on a podcast, because I'm a big podcast fan, about this anxiety reducing technique to kind of to ground and center yourself, to name 5 things you can see wherever you are. Stop what you're doing. Name 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can smell, and using all your senses and so forth, like 2 things you can taste and 1 thing you can touch. And I was out on my porch one morning, just stressing out. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 technique. And I started looking around and then I got to the things you can hear and like 4 things you can hear. And I heard a bird sing and I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. And then I heard what I knew was a different bird sing because it was a different tune. And I'm like, well, I wonder what bird that was. And I immediately pulled out my phone. I forgot all about my exercise. And I thought, I bet there's an app that'll tell me what bird is singing. And sure enough, I found in just a matter of minutes an app that told me it was a white-eyed vireo. And I'm like, what in the world is that? I didn't even know if I was pronouncing it correctly. I'm like, I've never heard of this bird before. And just like that, I was hooked. I was out on my porch every single day, multiple times a day with my app, listening for bird song, finding out what birds were in my area. And names of birds were popping up that I had never heard before. And this is a house that I've lived in for 30 years of my life. It's the same porch. It's the same trees. It's the same birds. They've always been there. And I know they've always been singing, but until I stopped and paid attention and actively listened, I had no idea on the nature that was around me.
Does the BirdNet app work like Shazam? You hold it up and it hears the bird and it says, oh, that's a red-breasted.
Yeah. So originally it was, the app was called BirdNet. And since then, it's upgraded because that was back in 2019. It's the Merlin bird app. It's by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And it will identify birds by song. You just hit identify with a little microphone, and it listens. And as soon as it hears the bird sing, it'll pop up and tell you what that bird is.
That's very cool.
It is really neat. And then it also will identify birds by a picture, or if you just put in a description, like it's a black and white bird that's in a tree and, your location, then it'll give you a list of possible birds that it could be. So it's a fantastic app.
So you discovered birds through 54321.
Yes.
Do you still utilize 54321 as a way to relieve anxiety?
Absolutely, but not as much as I did before, because for me, just going out and listening for the birds, I don't have to listen to or look for all the other things. I found something else, which is my birds.
And you found this, and I want to get to how this becomes a business. So you find this, and all of a sudden, you know what? I'm looking for birds. I'm listening for birds. How's all this kind of snowball into what you're doing now?
Yeah. So before then, I had never owned a bird feeder, and my daughter bought me a bird feeder for Christmas, and I hung the bird feeder out, and I go to the store just like, I'm going to pick up some seed. And I was immediately overwhelmed by the bird seed aisle. I had no idea what kind of seed to buy. It was kind of like I call it kind of like the Mexican restaurant experience. When you go to a Mexican restaurant and you open up the menu and it's like, there's so many choices and you have no idea what to pick. It's so overwhelming. I love Mexican food, but I hate Mexican restaurants. And I had no idea what to buy. So I ended up just like finally, after I don't know how long I stood there, I got a bag of bird seed and I brought it home and I filled my feeder and nothing really happened. I mean, like a few birds here and there, but then I noticed and there was weeds growing up underneath my feeder. I literally had corn stalks growing up underneath my feeder. So I'm like, this isn't working. And I went online and I'm like, another thing that really confused me standing in front of that wall of bird seed was all the plastic packaging. At that time, I had read, because in all my nerdy bird research, I had read about how 1 million birds die every year from plastic pollution. So if I'm a nature lover and I'm a bird lover and I'm a wild bird feeding hobbyist, why am I purchasing something in plastic when I should be concentrating on reducing my plastic intake, because overall to support the environment and to support birds. So I went online and I started Googling for, bird seed for Southeast Tennessee, because I wanted something for my area, because I had learned in my research that, the birds that we have here are different from the birds in California, and they eat different seeds. And I wanted something that was eco-friendly, and I really like doing business with certified B corporations, with registered benefit corporations that have a giving back component, or at least an eco-friendly, focus.
Kind of like is it Tom Shoes?
Exactly. And I could not find that birdseed company. So, I'm talking about my frustration. So I end up just through my research, finding out what birds were in our area. And I created a spreadsheet and what they like to eat. And then I'm like, okay, well, if I have a mix of these certain seeds, I bet the birds will come to my feeder. So I went out and I bought those single ingredient seeds, mixed them together and filled my bird feeder, and the bird activity exploded. I was seeing, birds that I had never seen before visit my feeder.
Did the birds talk to each other and go, hey, there's a new Mexican restaurant?
They probably did, because it was fascinating. I remember I had an indigo bunting, which is a brilliant blue, a migratory bird that's here really from April to October. And the first time that I saw that blue bird at my feeder, I was like, my heart was literally racing, because it was just amazing. And talked to my husband. He's a data scientist, and we were talking about, he's like, how you pulled to find out what birds were in our area and what they like to eat. You could do that for anywhere in the country. And I'm like, yeah, I could, because I had already had an idea of like, what if I had an eco-friendly birdseed company? And he's like, yeah, what if you had an eco-friendly birdseed company that also used bird sighting data to create the custom blends like you're doing right now? And I'm like, that's it. That's something unique, because, who needs another birdseed company, but a birdseed company that uses bird sighting data, is eco-friendly, and having that education piece was really important to me. So at Happy Birdwatcher, with all of our Happy Seed boxes, every order, you get a personalized letter that tells you, here's the 10 birds that you're likely to see in your area this month, and here's some really cool facts about them.
So I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee. If I'm in Memphis and I want to get some birdseed, I get in touch with your company and you say, okay, here's the data that says here's the birds in Memphis you're most likely to see. Here's the mixes. And you create that for wherever the customer is?
Yeah. All that you do, you place your order and then we have a little questionnaire and you tell us what type of bird feeders that you have, because that makes a difference too. We don't want to send you a big striped sunflower seed mix if you have a tube feeder, because that seed's going to get clogged in the feeder. Or if you have a platform feeder, we don't want to send you little tiny fine sunflower chips. We want to send you bigger seeds to accommodate the birds that are going to visit that feeder. So we ask you about your bird feeders. We ask you about what birds you want to see, because maybe you just love cardinals and you want to see all the cardinals, you know, that you want. Then we take that into consideration. So you don't have to do any of the work. We do all of the work. We look and see what birds are in your area, what you want to see, what feeder you have, and then we create a mix. And we take special requests, because I do have some customers that they're like, no, they've been feeding birds a while and they know exactly what they want. So we can create a mix of that. But with our seed, unlike the seed that you get in the store, you're not going to find sticks. You're not going to find junk filler seed. You're really going to find very premium, very clean seeds, packaged eco-friendly, and shipped to your door.
How many feeders does someone need in their yard? Or I'm sure it's a size thing.
It is a size thing, but I think to see, if you can only have one feeder, I would choose a hopper style feeder. It's going to accommodate the greatest variety of birds. But if you have space and room for more feeders, I think you should probably have 4 feeder types. You should have a hopper feeder, a tube feeder, which is great to attract like those beautiful yellow goldfinches or indigo buntings. We have a finch and bunting mix that fits perfectly in a tube feeder. A ground feeder. So many people neglect the ground, and we have like beautiful eastern towhees or white-throated sparrows or white-crowned sparrows. And I love mourning doves. A lot of people don't care for doves too much, but love mourning doves.
How can you not love a dove? It's the bird of peace.
I know. Some people don't like, some of my customers, they have unique requests sometimes. Don't really like the doves, but I have a ground feeder that accommodates my doves and my sparrows. And then for us, this time of year, you need a nectar feeder for your hummingbirds. Of course, you know, some parts of the country, which we have a lot of West Coast customers, and they have hummingbirds year round.
So you started this because you're on your porch and you started noticing birds. Obviously, the passions come out.
Yes.
And you start a business behind it. Was the business plan, not that it was always there, but were you surprised by how it took off?
I get asked that question often, and my answer is no. I haven't been surprised at all. For one, before launching the business, I really did my research and I found out about how big the wild bird food market is. I mean, nearly half of all homes in America have at least one bird feeder. $4 billion a year is spent on wild bird food alone. And that's not including the feeders and all the accessory items. So I knew that the market was huge, and I knew that there was a hole in the market and a need that needed to be met. And I felt very confident because my husband and I have talked about this. If I hadn't have felt confident, and if he had not have felt confident that this would really take off, we wouldn't have moved forward. I mean, we've invested a lot of personal money, savings and a lot of personal money into the business that we would not have done if we didn't think it was going to work. I mean, when we had this idea, again, I was the executive director of A Step Ahead, and I had the idea, really fleshed out the idea in December of 2020. And in January, I turned in my notice.
Wow, that's pretty quick.
Yeah. And by July 16th, 2021, we had the website launched. So I went from idea to full website launched, had the whole business branded, everything, concept, accepting orders in July. So in 7 months.
Were you the first company to do the custom mix based on data science?
Yeah, we're the only company that does that.
And you launched your website and all within 6 months. How do customers find you? I mean, is it a lot of SEO marketing or?
Yeah. So customer acquisition is a challenge. We started out with Google ads, Facebook ads, of course, word of mouth. I did a CPG accelerator program here in Chattanooga with Collab and Proof. And that was early on. That was in fall of 2021 when I barely had any customers, to really kind of like hone in our messaging and organic social media and so forth. But what really was kind of like launched us was I knew the value of media, and I started writing media pitches to like everyone I could think of. And I wrote a pitch and sent it to an editor at the Washington Post, and they picked us up for their holiday gift guide in 2022. And that was really business changing. At the time, I was running the business out of my home. I had one part-time employee, but we were literally mixing seed on my dining room table. And the Washington Post hit. And I remember it was like Thanksgiving Day when it came out, and I'm cooking in my kitchen and my phone starts, I get a little cha-ching app on my phone when sales come in, and it was like cha-ching, 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 cha-ching. And I'm like, what has happened? And we knew it was coming out, but I didn't know exactly when. And it was so, it exploded so much. I had to like close my website. I had to turn off orders because we couldn't fulfill them all. It was beyond my wildest dreams. But that allowed us then, because, come that January, once I had time to breathe, it's like, well, we've got to find a space. We've got to get out of the house, because I will never turn off orders again, due to constraints.
So when you started and you're doing the media pitches, in a great sense, you were your own PR company.
Yeah.
Was that part of your background, or how did you go in your mind to say, this is what I need to do, rather than seek out someone's help? Or was that part of the Collab or the Proof?
I had a great mentor from Collab, but I think also, given my nonprofit background, it's kind of like grant writing. You write a grant and you send it out. It's kind of the same concepts, except in a much shorter, more concise piece when I was writing media pitches. And I just did my homework and my research and went from there. It's funny, doing that myself, we got the Washington Post. We actually, last year, we were in Southern Living magazine, and we've had some mentions in Forbes.com and Better Homes and Gardens. And I did for a couple of months. I worked with a professional PR firm, and complete waste of money. I mean, what I was able to do myself, and maybe because it's my business and I know it better and I know what to pitch, it did not pay off as well to work with a professional publicist.
Mm-hmm. But your passion comes through with what you're doing on your own,
yes.
That belief. One of the things you talked about in the nonprofit world and with your company is the importance of a company that is giving back to the community. Talk a little bit about that for Happy Birdwatcher.
Yeah, so we are in Tennessee. We are a registered benefit corporation. It's my goal eventually for us to become a certified B corporation, but there's a lot that goes into that, and it will take some time. But as a registered benefit corporation, we do some things that give back. So for one, we promote the joy of mental health through bird watching. So a lot of our social media posts and our emails, we really talk about the mental health benefits of bird watching. And we talk about all the studies that are out there that link bird watching to happiness. I've went and I've spoken to some community groups about that, just about bird watching and mental health. The main thing that we do, and of course we have paper only, plastic free packaging. We're the only bird feed company that does that in the U.S. as well. We even have compostable zippered bags that we put our dried mealworms in, for example. But the main thing that we do is for every 10 pounds of birdseed that we sell, we give $1 to charities that help those struggling with either mental health issues or addiction. It's really important to me. Yeah. It's my favorite. We write checks in December every year. It's like the best day of the year when I get to calculate all the pounds of birdseed that we've sold, and I get to write that check to support organizations that are out there doing good work.
So you discovered bird watching and feeding them in your business out of stress and anxiety. Mm-hmm. Does the business bring you stress and anxiety?
I think that's what's hard about taking something that you love. It's like your hobby, and turning it into a business. Because now, and now my husband, he's a tag along, he's become a bird watcher too. And when we've taken birding vacations, just for the purpose, we went to Charleston, South Carolina, just to see a painted bunting, for example. And we saw one, it was great. But we've taken numerous birding vacations, and I keep a life list, and it's our hobby and how we de-stress. But now, since I've started the business, when you're going and you're looking for the bird, it's like, oh, I have to make a social media post about this. I have to write an email about this. So it has taken away from my hobby a little bit because there's so much overlap. And I'm terrible too. It's like I looked out the other day and my bird feeders at home were completely empty. And I'm like, oh, Susan, what if your customer saw your yard like this?
You're like the plumber whose pipes leak.
Exactly.
You don't have time for your own.
Exactly.
You bring up an interesting point in that. I kind of look at people who turn their hobby into a business the same as people who decide that their favorite vacation place is where they're going to move to. And you move there and you get a job and it becomes the daily routine and it takes away from how special it was from you.
Yeah, exactly. So I do try to work hard, again, because I still do love bird watching very much. And my husband and I, we still try to take those little bird watching trips when we can and try to separate it from the business.
Yeah. Before I get to the last question, I got one more I want to ask you. Where do you see this going now? Or do you have it where you want it?
Oh, no, it's not where we want it at all. I see, we're in Dunlap. We moved out of the house into a commercial space. Actually, it's a 6,000 square foot warehouse space. So we have...
It's a good size.
Yeah, we have plenty of room to grow. My goal is to grow this. So again, I have big hopes and big dreams, and I'm, 50 years old, and I need this and want this to be a multi-million-dollar business. And I think we can take it there. And I think that we can employ hundreds of people in Dunlap, Tennessee.
How many you got employed now?
Right now we have 2. Mm-hmm. And myself. and one
That's
day,
a given.
And one day maybe I won't have to work 60 hours a week. But yeah, I really think that we can grow this into something really big and really special that not only creates good jobs for my community, but also creates, kind of life-changing financial security for my family.
Well, it's a fascinating business and how you got into it. Before I get to my last question, I do want to remind listeners who makes all of this possible. Thank you to the Tennessee Valley Authority for sponsoring My Morning Cup. You can follow TVA on social media to learn more about its multifaceted mission of service, and visit TVA.com/do good here to explore exciting TVA career opportunities. Last question for you.
Okay.
What would you tell your 25-year-old self is important for a happy life?
It's interesting because when I was 25, I was a new mom. And I had an infant at home, and now I'm 50 and I have a grandchild. I have an infant at home. So I feel like
full circle,
not much has changed. But I do think about that a lot. Like, what can I do differently, or what can I, impart to this grandchild maybe and do differently from my older children. And I think surrounding yourself with people who make you laugh. My husband and I, we just celebrated our 5th anniversary, which is why it's on my mind. And I know in our wedding vows, we wrote our own vows, and I said, that, Sam makes me laugh every single day. And that is so important because I think a big chunk of my life, I didn't laugh and I didn't take the time to really enjoy the little things that were around me. I was very serious.
Yeah.
And as I get older, even though I'm very serious in my business and I want to do big, serious things, I've learned the importance of just having fun. And if you don't have someone there to help you along, especially for someone like me that tends to have a very serious personality, then life isn't as enjoyable.
I love that point because we all do go through so many things, taking it more serious than it needs to be, worrying about things we can't control, and missing the things that make you smile.
Yes.
And having those things that make you smile is what gets through the day, gets through the week, gets through the year.
It does, just like those birds. When they land on your feeder, you can't help but it brings a smile to your face.
Oh, what a way to wrap that up. I like that. That's perfect.
All right.
Susan, thank you so much.
You're welcome. It was great to be here.
I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to My Morning Cup, a podcast by Consta Media Advisors. If you liked this episode, please share it with a friend. I release a new episode each week, so be sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple, Google, or wherever you listen to podcasts.